That may be an affectation. My French pronunciation is not very good, but I'm trying to copy the way Father Ong would say it. This is very special. I've been working with this material and realized how often that word appears. And so I thought maybe it would be worth digging into that a little bit more. So I'm suggesting a deeper sense of Walter Ong's integration of theology, ecology, and spirituality can be gained through an understanding of his understanding of the milieu. Though he did not often use the term ecology outside of its conventional sense of planetary stewardship, Ong's thinking was deeply ecological, given his principle of relationism. Everything is related to everything else, and thus there is always something more to be said about everything. An objective reality exists and is, in part, knowable, but what one can say about it is always partial and subjective, since what we do choose to say springs from our own conscious and unconscious motivations. Ong's concept of a milieu involves an internalization of and personal response to one's surroundings. In other words, the milieu is an environment not only around us, but also within us. Such an understanding resonates more with the concept of acoustic space that is derived from an auditory rather than visual synthesis of reality. And it facilitates for Ong an integration of technology, ecology, and spirituality. Sometimes Ong used the word environment or context when speaking of what we now might fit under the umbrella of media ecology, but he more frequently spoke of milieu, even placing the word in the titles of 4 of his publications. Of course, that was 4 out of 465, so that's a small number. Milieu for him was not a univocal term, and you know what's interesting there? Would you be able to give me a slide advancer?
Oh, slide advancer?
It's not, I think it's...
Oh.
And these are just quotes that are, they're only quotes, and just bring up in case you don't understand what I say. But those are his 4 publications. And then these are examples of how he would refer to the term. So again, the point is, he wasn't using it univocally, in many different ways. But in each sense, there's a suggestion of a dialectic between the individual and one's surroundings. Already in 1943, when still a student at St. Louis University, Ong observed that the literary critic I.A. Richards had a knack for asking the right questions. And, quote, such a knack is a matter of the philosophical milieu into which one is born and of one's own special background of interest within that milieu. Ong's relationship with the milieu is interactive, dialectical, and interrogative. Ong acknowledged that at St. Louis University in the 1940s, there was a formative milieu saturated with St. Louis Thomism, focused on noetics and the sensory base for understanding that was preparative for his own media studies and those of Marshall McLuhan as well. It was thus intriguing to read, as I was preparing this presentation, Eric McLuhan's post to the Media Ecology listserv. He said, perhaps a better word for medium would be milieu. Another synonym would be ground, as in figure and ground. And when I inquired to Eric privately, he elaborated. I believe that Dan and I did discuss the idea of substituting milieu for medium. That would have been in the late 70s. Since the word, as used in the title chapter of Understanding Media, is used in the chapter of Understanding Media, and in the first chapter and elsewhere in the book, is identified with the idea of environment. Another substitute for medium is ground. This is still Eric McLuhan. The 3 terms are equivalent. I suggested milieu as it is fresh and does not carry all the unfortunate baggage that attaches to medium these days. That is why I recommend it, particularly to people who are confused. Latterly, I find that yet another cognate with medium and milieu and ground is formal cause. That was an email in April. I think there is perhaps an equivalency between the terms milieu, medium, and ground in formal cause, but there are also nuances that distinguish them. With its etymology being mi, middle, and medium, middle, place. Milieu is a middle place, which can mean medium, mean, center, environment, family, surroundings, setting, framework, living space, the middle of a square, a place equally remote from all points of the circumference or extremities of a thing. The French philosopher, Michel Serres, who also privileged the term milieu in his investigations of mediation, exploited a number of these possibilities for the word in its meaning in French. Quote, milieu has neither beginning nor end, but is surrounded by other middles in a field of connections, relationships, extensions, and potential. And following him, Stephen Conner proposes, quote, slide advance, a metaphor of the milieu that is intended to encompass the individual, the singular experiences of the senses, as well as the cultural, the meaning made of sensational experience, the way difference is established and reproduced. And then finally, the richness of the connotative and denotative possibilities of the word eventually led Bernard Wall, the general editor of the translation of Père Pierre Teilhard Desjardins' The Divine Milieu, to despair of any attempt to successfully translate into English the French word. Quote.
Go next one.
Okay.
Because here we are. Okay.
Perhaps what most needs explanation is the retention of the original French title, Le Milieu Divin. This has been done more by necessity than by choice. The word milieu has no exact equivalent in English, as it implies both center and environment or setting. And even the normal use in England of the word milieu seems to have insular overtones. One suggested title, in the context of God, did not meet the approval of the French committee in charge of the publication of Teilhard's works, and I myself did not feel that another, the divine environment, was close enough to the original. As we could not reach an agreement, we left the title in French. Readers are asked to understand this word in the precise French connotation in which it was used by the author. And I think that's kind of important to recognize that this word has special meaning, particularly the French-speaking people. And while there is no line, understanding milieu as center and environment, enclosed and enclosing, circling and encircled, has implications for the reconceptualization of space and time that Ong had attempted through an auditory synthesis of the phenomenal world. While there is no line of influence being suggested here, Ong was familiar with these French writers, Teilhard and Serres, and he was fluent in French. He was even honored by the French government in '63 as being awarded as the Chevalier de l'Ordre des Palmes Académiques. And for 8 months in 1950-51, he lived across the hall from Père Teilhard in the Jesuit residence in Paris. Regarding Serres, Ong wrote in his review of William Paulson's The Noise of Culture, Literary Text in the World of Information.
You want this one?
Yeah. Paulson makes a great deal of the limitations of scientific systems, limitations which scientists themselves have liked to point out in detail, sensitively and insightfully following the various leads of Michel Serres. Paulson opts for interfacing various humanistic subjects as well as in the humanities and the sciences, which cannot be completely separated from one another anyhow. The roots of modern interest in information theory lie deep, and the roots of his modern interest in noise just as deep or deeper. Systems have to be broken out of. As noise, literature is a system breaker. Again, Ong's concept of milieu bespeaks the anti-visual, system-breaking acoustic space that derives from an auditory rather than visual processing of reality. In his phenomenological investigation of the sensorium, Ong had explained that whereas sight opens the world to us from a spectator's frontal view, sound places us at the center of activity. Similarly, whereas sight promotes spatialization and diagrammatic representation, sound is intimately connected with time, as is human thinking. in 1964 to illustrate a Thomistic point that a judgment, that is, the juncture of a subject and a predicate, is always a temporal event. He used as an example the judgment, the simple judgment, this is a watch, employing the word milieu and some synonyms to demonstrate the temporality of the event of judgment. The juncture is such, affected when subject and predicate are in a sense tasted as united, certainly has a quasi-instantaneous, timeless air. But the way to it, its milieu, its surrounding, its environment and ground, the words themselves which pass briefly through time and the concepts with them, the progression itself from this to watch, all of this is in time. Milieu thus is not simply inert surroundings, but also a dynamic centering process involving conscious and unconscious responses. More than an external environment or context, a milieu is a tool which is internalized and thereby influences how we identify, interpret, structure, and valorize that environment. When Ong says that all men's concepts always fit the psychological structures of the milieu in which they develop, today just as in the past, that was a quote. He is expressing, of course, a basic insight regarding the influence of communications technology on thinking, communicating and the structuring of reality. The transformations of the oral world by script, print, and electronic media constitute new milieu that influence noetic processes and psychological structures. The milieu enables the medium as the medium transforms the milieu. This concept of milieu also implies a dynamic nature of mediation that is more noticeable in an auditory synthesis. In a 2001 letter to Lance Strait, Ong emphasized the agonistic dialectical structure of a milieu that he had earlier described in detail in Fighting for Life. One thing I might call to your attention is the exact bearing of in medias res. This is an accusative case, not the ablative in medias rebus, and thus has the force of into the middle of things, not simply in the middle of things. When Latin users attended to the way in which epics and other verbal genres start off, they noted that the poet typically plunges into the middle of things, more forceful than stating that he starts in the middle of things. I mentioned this just to keep us on target when we need to be with this expression. There's not enough time to develop it here, but this understanding of milieu also carries over into Ong's work in the 90s and 80s on language as hermeneutic, which is discussed in a forthcoming book from Cornell University Press, Language as Hermeneutics, Ong's last unpublished work that will be coming out in December. A milieu includes the context for communication, what Stephen Tyler refers to as the unspoken or unsaid, that underlies all human communication. Context as milieu shapes the concepts and personality structures of all parties in the communication, and thus the goal of hermeneutics are what the manifestation is not evident to the milieu in which the interpreter's utterance lives. Interpretation is entering imaginatively into the milieu of another person, and thus the presence of self to self is achieved through the presence of self to others, and for God, the Jesuit priest, and for Ong, the Jesuit priest, the presence of self to God and God to self. The concept of milieu thus always opens access to spirituality, which of course for Ong all things did. Though Ong stated Teilhard had not influenced the development of his own thinking, and though he resisted association with Teilhard societies because of some cultish or Gnostic orientations, Ong acknowledged that he and Teilhard were, quote, on the same wave, sharing an awareness of God's presence in an evolving universe. In a 1969 lecture on interiority and modernity in the spiritual exercises, he discussed what relevance do the spiritual exercises have today? And he answered, because the spiritual exercises are concerned with decision, they envision a return to God. From Him we come, to Him we go. Across the world, in the milieu of the world, for us, self, world, God define one another. In this sense, withdrawal from the world is impossible and is not practiced even by the most strictly cloistered. St. Ignatius saw life as return to God across the world in the milieu of the world. And at the end of this prepared typescript, he added a name, which is also the divine milieu of Teilhard. In his Christocentric incarnational theology, Ong, like Teilhard, experienced the spiritual through an immersion in time and matter, for the entire evolving 13.5 billion year universe is saturated with the presence of the divine. Or as Teilhard wrote, because we have believed intensely and with a pure heart in the world will open the arms of God to us. It is for us to throw ourselves into these arms so that the divine milieu should close around our lives like a circle. More than environment, medium, or ground, milieu evokes acoustic space in which the word is wrapped up in sound, time, matter, power, struggle, and mystery. Quote, awareness of the irreducibly non-spatial elements in thought is crucial if we are to grasp the meaning and the sacredness of the word. Thus, in Ong's milieu, technology, ecology, and spirituality were of one piece.
All right, so the next person up is just last call. Is a Mr. Brian Glover here? Doesn't look like it. All right. In that case, next up is Mr. Dennis Calley from University of Texas at Tyler with the panel called The Sacramental View of McLuhan, Ong, and Carey. Do you have any slides you'd like, perhaps, or no? Okay.
I'm glad I'm second because I think what I have to offer follows very well, especially the last paragraph of what Tom just said. And also because if I were third by then I would be so saturated with sweat that it would be disgusting for you to, even more disgusting for you to watch me then than with me now. So all of us at this conference here are fascinated by probably all of the canonical figures in media ecology, but certainly also McLuhan, Ong, and James Carey. And I know that for many people, simply probing their works, reading all of them, applying them in new contexts is fascinating enough. But many people attempt to try to understand kind of the Welsachang of their larger corpus and where are they coming from, what informs this worldview. And some of those folks in that quest have begun to explore the religious convictions of these three and to see if they could crack the code of, what is the origin of all of this insight? Are these guys just all, firing brain cells in a unique kind of way, or is there something coherent and common despite their very distinct differences and different contributions to ecology? Oddly, some people reject the idea that these three scholars, all of whom were Roman Catholic and all of whom attended daily Mass, they reject the notion that had anything to do with their media ecologies. They hold the idea that these guys were secular and media theoretical Monday through Saturday, Catholic only on Sunday. A growing but still small chorus of others, though, are beginning to say, hey, wait, there might be something in this notion that these guys receive a certain sacrament, which they hold to be a real divine presence. And maybe there is something there that nurtured their point of view, it nurtured their soul. My impression is that these three guys have been formed more, or at least as much, by percept as concept in their embrace of the faith and in their expression of that faith in their intellectual reflections on social reality. And I submit that their grasp of reality is informed by a sensorium of the senses of the soul. that they possess a certain inner vision or insight, or to switch to an oral faculty, a certain loudspeaker on their inner voice, or a sacramental view of reality. And I've attempted to sketch 5 dimensions of a sacramental view of life that I've distilled from a few Catholic novelists and essayists. I submit that a sacramental view is an orientation toward reality that is anagogical, incarnational, anti-environmental, disruptive, and revelatory, as artistically expressed or mediated through signs and symbols. And I first applied this framework that I generated from studying these novelists and studies of these novelists to McLuhan and the McLuhan Faith and Works Conference in Canada. Was it last year? 2 years ago. 2 years ago. And I still think that McLuhan is the best exemplar of these, among these 3, or at least the most apparently sacramental. But having applied it to McLuhan, I wanted to check out if it might also be applicable to Ong and Carey. And I think it does, but I want to offer these as sort of my first shot across the bow, and I'd like you to say, no, I think you missed the point here, or what about this, or to provide even more examples of it if you think it exists in the case of either of these 3. The literary figures from whom I've distilled these 5 dimensions of a sacramental view have the twofold blessing, really, of both having written about the sacramental view and had scholars who studied their work as sacramental view, and they wrote work that was sacramental. So I think they're good examples. So they include Flannery O'Connor, G.K. Chesterton, Walker Percy, and J.R.R. Tolkien. I don't know how many of these I can get to, because at first I thought I had 15 minutes, and maybe we have 20 now, we have 15, so I don't expect to finish. In any case, even if I had the entire time to present it all, it's not possible to capture this thing that to me is still so mysterious, so I really hope you'll do it right now. So I'll just jump in, and if I stop at point 2.5, the second one, then we can talk later if you're interested. So a first attribute of a sacramental view is its anagogical sense. One oriented by a sacramental view of life applies a hermeneutic that finds in all reality an intrinsic goodness, recognizing in the material reality in and of itself something numinous, existentially satisfying, and divinely beautiful. A critic of O'Connor applauds her sense, sacramental sense, that he sees in her ability to discover ultimate reality in the natural world and present it through observable details, the mystery of our position on earth. Similarly, Tolkien speaks of seeing things as they were meant to be seen. The character of Will Barrett in Walker Percy's The Second Coming, when he's freed of his reliance on abstractions about reality instead of reality itself, catches sight of the yellow sunlight between the spokes of the pines. Percy says, things in the world mirror in themselves, however dimly, something beyond themselves. McLuhan recognized this anagogical sacramental sense in Chesterton when he wrote, he rejoices at the green hair on the hills, or the smell of Sunday morning, and the daily miracles of sense and consciousness. And McLuhan demonstrates his own anagogical orientation through wordplay, among many other ways. In a letter to Jacques Maritain, for example, he contemplates the French philosopher's pronunciation of the word longing. The letter says, let me speak to you of an occasion when you talked at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto on the longing for God. Throughout your address, you pronounced longing as lunging. It had a very mysterious resonance. On consulting the big Oxford Dictionary, I discovered that lunge means a length of rope on which a horse is exercised in a circle. Lunge is the root and origin of longing. Is this not a nice example of the reverberations of the logos reaching across language barriers? The materiality of a word reaches beyond its denotative meaning, inherently, from somebody who holds a sacramental view. In orality and literacy, Ong conceptualizes the communication of an individual within an oral society as encased in a communal soul. He also sketches the association between orality, community, and the sacral. He writes, the interiorizing force of the oral word relates in a special way to the sacral, to the ultimate concerns of existence. In a 1959 text entitled American Catholic Crossroads, he expresses the sense in which material phenomena can imperfectly reflect and dimly foreshadow something of eternal significance. In The Barbarian Within, he writes, expression in human terms, in other words, is not at all act, but is quite replete with potency, is faced outward to other things, ultimately to God. James Carey's analogical reach is rather straightforward. In Communication as Culture, he grounds his ritual view of communication in a conception of some ultimate ordered reality. He accords ritual communication a religious purpose of construction and maintenance of an ordered, meaningful cultural world that can serve as a control and container for human action. The archetype of a ritual view of communication is the sacred ceremony. He writes, one of his famous students, Quentin Schultz, characterized Carey's view this way. Although expressed in seemingly non-theological language, Carey's essay contends that communication is less about the secular goals of sending and receiving messages per se than it is about the inherently sacred practice of responsibly establishing cosmos out of chaos. But what accords the prosaic realities of a Holiday Inn or pine trees in a Percy novel, or the green hair on hills in a Chesterton poem, or their divine character? Those who assume a sacramental view find within the created world the presence of the incarnate. So a second quality of a sacramental view is that it is incarnational. In O'Connor's work, different levels of reality in one image or situation dwell together in what Thomas Merton called a living and sacred synthesis. Tolkien speaks of the good catastrophe, or eucatastrophe, of the birth of Christ with the insertion of grace into the created world. Where I find McLuhan's most focused attention on the incarnational aspect of the sacramental view is in his consideration of discarnation. In a letter to Sheila Watson, he writes about the move away from the incarnate being. Most of us, I think, are familiar with his writing that. The other point I had in mind is the characters of human age as angels. Electrically, it is the sender who is sent, whether on the telephone or on radio. We are transported electrically and bodily. Thus, the people of the magnetic city are angels, literally, good or bad, disembodied intelligences. And he repeats his concern in letters to Claire Booth and to Father John Moll, to whom he referred to the electronic environment as the strictly Luciferian product and a mock-up of the mystical body. Walter Ong anchors his incarnational view in a Judeo-Christian contemplation of the potency of sound in the overall sensorium. He writes there that sound is the meeting point of each human person with God. James Carey finds a living and sacred synthesis par excellence in the Catholic Mass. And Schultz, his student, reports that Carey believed in the article of Catholic faith that the sacrament of the Eucharist is not a symbolic but a literal event in which participants share in the real body of Christ, what theologians call transubstantiation. Schultz describes the theology underlying Carey's communication theory and explains how Carey understood this sacramentality to play out in communication. Communication is fundamentally, although not exclusively, he wrote, a means for human beings to imitate and thereby engage vicariously in the original sacramental work of the Creator, giving order to the formless void of chaos. Third, a sacramental view is anti-environmental. One experiencing what he or she perceives as an eclipse of the divine life steps away from the obstructed view. The person retreats from the human prosaic experience that he or she feels to be in need of repair. For Tolkien, the fantasy genre provided an alternative frame to the modern novel and its mentality, which verged on overthrowing centuries-old tradition. Percy adopted semiotics as his instrument, which he narrated and enacted in a novel form. Language for him provided a bridge between the empirical and the metaphysical. O'Connor, too, used the novel and short story, but her signature item was the grotesqueness of some of her characters. Chesterton deployed phrase twisting. McLuhan draws our attention to the function of art of the sort that Tolkien, Percy, O'Connor, and Chesterton fashioned as anti-environment or counterpunch to the views of the world out of sync with the divine design incarnated reality. He makes clear that the artist's critique is indispensable to the process of checking the deleterious effects of technology. The task of art, he writes, is to correct the bias of technological media, to create artistic situations that correct the sensory bias and derangement brought about by the new form. Art constructs anti-environment that would in turn restore sacramental life. On sets environments against each other in a sort of perspective by incongruity, using orality and literacy as figures and grounding each other. Though his organizational structure is largely chronological and evolutionary, the distinctiveness of one paradigm is better understood when juxtaposed against another. Orality literacy is itself an anti-environmental framework, a framework that does more than mark communication characteristics in time, and it tacitly, and in some cases explicitly, uses literacy to celebrate the divine dimensions of orality. Carey's transmission ritual model of communication employs a similar juxtaposition to highlight the virtues of one paradigm. His profile of the transmission view of communication is dutiful in outlining the linear progression, but by comparison, the ritual view is far more fully explored and celebrated. We understand the virtue of communication as ritual primarily as we grasp the luxation of telegraphic communication. I apologize, I'm racing through these, but I'm still bound by space and time. So. All right, fourth, a sacramental view is disruptive. What should be emphasized is sacramental art possesses a moral dimension. Sacramental media ecologists are concerned about the moral effects on environments altered by technology. They sometimes deploy severe artistic tactics as social interventions to jar our consciousness of what they intuit as assaults on the moral ecology. Chesterton, for example, used paradox and pun to challenge all complacent acceptance of conventional wisdom. O'Connor sought new and shocking ways to depict concrete reality to communicate ineffable realities. Percy's wayfaring characters suffer stifling effects of scientism, technological deification, and consequent abstractions. The character Will, for example, in Percy's Last Gentleman, limps through his life on a bad knee, half dead and aphasic, lost in the confusions of his private constructions, and solely dependent on his thinking to direct him in his quest. Tolkien's Gollum was presented as a small, slimy creature with a horrible swallowing sound. Tolkien's characters inhabit an alternative reality, a fantasy subterranean world, to the surface terrain that the novelist wants to jolt into a new consciousness. Though not invoking the language of sacramentality, McLuhan explains the sacramental role of the artist. The poet, the artist, the sleuth, whoever sharpens our perception, tends to be antisocial, rarely self-adjusted. He cannot go along with currents and trends. A strange bond often exists between antisocial types and their power to see environments as they really are. This need to interface, to confront environments with a certain antisocial power, as manifest in the famous story, The Emperor's New Clothes. In fact, McLuhan subtitles his War and Peace in the Global Village an inventory of some of the current spastic situations that could be eliminated by more feed forward. He deployed paradox, the artistic tool he found so attractive in Chesterton, to subvert conventional wisdom so as to get people to awake from their slumber. Through it all, I submit, he sought to afflict the comfortable as he divulged to Edward Waken. Christ said, "I do not bring you peace but the sword." The church as the custodian of civilized values and so on. That church is all over, I'd say. We are on a life raft. That sort of survival operation, our only hope is apocalypse. Unlike the writing of McLuhan, no one could accuse the writing style of Walter Ong or James Carey of being spastic. The tenor of Ong's major work is intricate in its detail and dispassionate in tone. Carey writes with the lucidity that one might expect of a trained journalist. Nevertheless, one could say, in fact, that they utilize the benefits of a writing paradigm precisely to indict that paradigm. If there was any doubt that he intended to warn against the deleterious effects of a print paradigm, Ong makes the intent clear in presence of the word. The shift of focus from the spoken word and habits of auditory synthesis to the alphabetized written word and visual synthesis devitalizes the universe, weakens the sense of presence in man's life world, and in doing so tends to render this world profane to make it an agglomeration of things. Although Ong appears at times clinical in his critical illumination of literacy, he mines the byproducts of literacy to disrupt them, and in doing so to celebrate the triumph of voice, the spoken word. And Carey does his disrupting. He deploys it against objective reporting. He indicts its disruption of what he regards as the more enlightened approach to journalism that preceded the more so-called objective reporting. And I don't have time to get into that completely, but, and I'll skip also the last two steps, but essentially what I find in these folks is they go through life with a certain radar, informed by a sacramental view that in their case is actually nurtured by a sacrament that leads them to view things in a second order way, to have a second order signification that leads them to be able to divine, pardon the pun, a meaning of something, or be able to see something that other people just don't see. We see it just in ephemeral terms. And so one of the characteristics of sacramental views is I say that it's revelatory too. And disruptive, did I get to that one? Did I get to the fourth?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry we're out of time, but you get a sense of what I'm saying.
What is the fifth one again?
It's revelatory.
Thank you.
I knew somebody's going to ask me to say that word again.
Revelatory.
It's too hot to get it straight.
All right. Up next is Fernando Gutierrez from Tecnológico de Monterrey. He has misinformation and disinformation, the proliferation of fake news on the digital environment.
Can you help me to finish the presentation?
Sure. Could somebody,
Oh, next time.
Of course.
The problem is it's hot. Yes. I prepared this presentation for you to understand, not because it is complex, but because my Spanish hasn't, so it's going to be easy for you. Let me put my...
the podium.
It's a lectern right away, thank you. I'll do the podium.
We're going to talk about this, misinformation and disinformation, the proliferation of fake news and the digital environment. I'm going to start with these ideas. The audience for traditional mass media faces the problem of having a lack of information due to censorship, self-censorship against the setting, and a reduced number of news sources. With digital technologies, the problem is that we now have information overload. Consequently, this information is difficult or even impossible for some people to assimilate. The problem we have is of information glut, misinformation and disinformation, not information scarcity. From the view of the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard, in this digital age, new technologies create a terrible world for the person who is incapable of assimilating all the information that is received. It is probably the role of a digital gatekeeper or a digital filter that turns out to be indispensable in this new era. Without this figure, those individuals who lack training in information analysis would remain exposed to an enormous pile of unfiltered information that can be found on the web. This information is nothing new and can be found throughout our history. So fake news is assault as humanity. Let's see some examples. I read a year ago in the Telegraph, the story about Octavian in ancient Rome. He famously used a campaign of disinformation to aid his victory over Marcus Antonius in the final war of the Roman Republic. Octavian proved the shrewd propagandist using short, sharp slogans written upon coins. He spread the idea that a degenerate Roman was striving to subvert the liberties of the Roman people, to subjugate Italy and the West under the rule of an Oriental queen. Octavius said that Mark Antony had been corrupted by his love affair with Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt. But Rome's republicans never fell for the rhetoric because they saw it for what it was, fake news. In the end, they sided with Octavian, not because they trusted him more than Antony, but because they view him as the lesser of two evils. Let's see short video. Maybe you're going to remember this from Rome, the series.
I know how unhappy you are, and I cannot blame you. For who would not weep when he hears that the great Mark Antony pays homage to foreign gods? That he has abandoned his wife, his child, and his country. I am asked if he has gone mad, if he is bewitched. I have no explanation. We may weep for him, but then we must do our duty, for he is no longer a Roman, but an Egyptian. And what is left for us to do but fight him? Fight him and destroy him.
Well, he's trying to convince the Senate that Marcus Antonius is a traitor. Some other examples in history. In the Genesis, for example, Paul cautions Timothy, the time will come when people will not listen to sound doctrine, but will follow their own desires and will collect for themselves more and more teachers who will tell them what they are itching to hear. They will turn away from listening to the truth and give their attention to legends. Or Demosthenes, in a political system based on speeches, how can it be safely administered if the speeches are not true? Pietro Arentino tried to manipulate the pontifical election of 1522 by writing wicked sonnets about all the candidates and pasting them for the public to admire the bust of a figure known as Pasquino, near the Piazza Navona in Rome. The pasquinade then developed into a common genre of diffusing nasty news, most of it fake, about public figures. And then after pasquinades, we have the canard, a version of fake news that was hawking in the street of Paris for the next 200 years. Some examples of this fake news. And we also have this problem. It's very interesting. Not misinformation, but misunderstanding. Malcolm Gladwell said in this book, David and Goliath, that we misunderstand the true meaning of advantages and disadvantages. It was Goliath who was the vulnerable one. He said he was a giant, which made him slow, clumsy, and probably half blind, because double vision is a common side effect of an excess of human growth hormone. The only way he could have beaten David was by literally getting his hands on him, but David had no need to go anywhere near him because he had a sling. So it's a problem. It's very interesting, this book, because with this history, he explained a lot of things, a lot of histories about this misunderstanding of the history. Here it's another example. This is deception plans were undertaken to convince the Germans, this is in the Second World War, that the main landing would be near Calais. This would reduce the flow of German reinforcement into Normandy. So false information was spread by double agents. The Calais area was heavily bombed, and a dummy army was set up in eastern England opposite Calais. So this is another example. You know well this other example about the War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds was performed as a Halloween episode on the series on Sunday, October 13, 1938, and aired over the Columbia Broadcasting System radio. It became famous for allegedly causing mass panic, although the scale of the panic is disputed as the program had relatively few listeners. The first two-thirds of the one-hour broadcast was presented as a series of stimulated news bulletins which suggested an actual alien invasion by Martians was currently in progress. And more recently, fake news. Maybe you know this, the 5 top fake political news stories on Facebook, on the right side, and the 5 top fake crime news stories on Facebook. It's incredible when you read the stories that some people think that it was true. Well, some other organizations are trying to classify all this information and creates a proposal. Let me. Well, this is another interesting. It's about Mexico. That was the news. Administrative error causes Mexico to lose rights to its national anthem. And there were a lot of people discussing about this problem. Why Mexico loses the rights of the national anthem? And the problem is that I saw a lot of people, with degrees, doctors, master's degrees, discussing. They think that it was true. Very interesting. This is the classification. We have fake news purveyor, fake news creator, hyper-partisan websites, Facebook pages, and social media accounts spreading this kind of news, misleading information. This is a classification from Media Matters. It's very interesting. And clickbait, satire, propaganda, conspiracy theory, mistakes in reporting. We have these problems. And it's very interesting because behind this, it's business. The people who is behind this are making money spreading this news. So let's see. Most students don't know when news is fake. Stanford study finds this is very interesting. Teens absorb social media news without considering the source. So parents can teach research skills and skepticism. Some 82% of middle schoolers couldn't distinguish between an ad labeled as sponsored content and a real news story on a website. This is according to a Stanford University study of more than 7,000 students from middle school through college. The study is the biggest so far on how teens evaluate information they find online. Many students judge the credibility of newsy tweets, for example, on how much detail they contain or whether if a large photo was attached, rather on the source. So if the tweet comes with a large photo, it's true. For these people, it's also very, very interesting. So why is this happening? Well, there are some ideas. So how big is this fake news economy? Here are some numbers. 120 fake news sites, at least. One professor created a list of fake news sites that could be shared publicly, only to take it down after receiving harassment. But the science can't report it, and we are talking about more than 120 sites. There are some people that say that they earning 3,000 per day spreading this kind of news. Or Paul Horner said that he can earn 10,000 a month. Although he said when his fake story about street artist Banksy, he said he was collecting 10,000 each day, spreading this kind of information. So again, it's interesting. I think this is the model. This is happening, and that's why we have a lot of this kind of information. What are the countries doing? Maybe you know about this bill. Germany's cabinet approved a new bill that punishes social networking sites if they fail to swiftly remove illegal content such as hate speech or defamatory fake news. Chancellor Angela Merkel's cabinet agreed on rules that will impose fines of up to 50 million euros on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms. The German Justice Minister Heiko Maas said that the companies offering social online platforms are responsible for removing hateful content. He said the new bill would not restrict the freedom of expression, but intervene only when criminal hatred or intentionally false news are posted. Well, before that, some platforms, social platforms are working against this problem. Facebook is fighting back against this law that would force social networks to remove hateful content more quickly. This company said that it's inadequate law, of course, because they want to do more. They cannot. They don't have the possibility to remove this kind of content. So what are they doing? In this case, Facebook is trying to spread disinformation. So they are empowering the people to avoid this kind of problem. Here are some recommendations. Be skeptical of headlines, investigate the source, look for mistakes, check the URL, look if it is satire or not, consider the photos, check the dates, and double check. It's difficult if you know 5 times or 6 times the uses, less probable that it is false. Anyway, it's important to do the other things. Here, it's something interesting. Google, for example, has this algorithm. They are working with some companies to detect this kind of news. But the problem is that they don't have a lot of staff checking all the information. And you have to claim if there's a problem, so it's, they have to do more. And this is also in Facebook. In Facebook you can put if this is fake news, or if it's not interesting, or anyway you can mark the news, but we are depending on the other people. So we have again to do more. And I would like to do an example right now. If you can take your phones and go to menti.com. I'm going to use my 3 minutes. So please take your phone and go to menti.com and put this code 26873. And look, we're gonna go to. I would like you to answer this question. Mexican mayor accused of plagiarizing House of Cards Underwood speech. Tell me if it's true, if it's false, or if you don't know. Again, this is the code, 26873. Menti.com. Okay, I don't know. 67 false. 17. 14 true. Okay. 10 seconds more. Question is, Mexican mayor accused of plagiarizing House of Cards on the Wood speech. Okay. 24, I don't know. I think this is the smartest thing to do. Definitely not true. But let me tell you that it was right. It was true. A mayor in Mexico used the speech of Frank Underwood in a public thing. Yeah. So it was very interesting. Let's do this other. What is the problem with this photo? In Mexico, they say young men armed with tubes and knives run through the street of Catepec, state of Mexico. Look the photo and look the text. What is the problem with this photo and the text? I don't know if you can see here the sign, and then.
Is that Arabic?
What is the problem?
Is the language on the sign?
Yeah, it's the language. They said this was in Mexico. We know it was in Mexico. It was in Egypt. But an important group of formula is a known radio station, a radio group. They spread this information, and the photo was in other context. So this is very interesting. Well, so. Well, I don't have more time. Yes? No. Well, let me close with this. The distinguish between fact and fiction has become increasingly challenging. Now the gatekeeper role that the legacy media newspapers and network television news once played falls to all of us. Today, everyone assumes the position of publisher, and technology has democratized the process of making of news. And this is another excuse to study the environments and to be here. Thank you for your attention. We're going to have time for discussion.
So 15 minutes of Q&A.
I've got a question for Dennis. Sorry, I just clicked on here.
Dennis is here.
Hey Dennis, with these people that have got a nervous itch about fake news, are they the sort of flip side of the somebody with a sacramental understanding of communication, in the sense like it's Ramistic, nominalistic, essentially Platonic, and it alienates people? This is the mindset that would find fake news problematic, right? It's almost the exact flip of all the characteristics that you laid out as being central to somebody that had a sacramental understanding of communication. In other words, sacramentalists don't give a fuck about fake news, right? Because it's not a problem.
No, I think that they would see it as symptomatic of the sort of the dismemberment or the disfigurement of the body, you know, the mystical body, that people would need to go to this length. It's a symptom of something that's disordered. So I think they would view it on some second order of meaning. They wouldn't see it as irrelevant to their concern. A sacramental view, I think, views all of reality as cohering around something. It's either just veering from that or it's within it, but they don't see it as irrelevant. I don't think so.
Yeah, fake news is the highest art form. We all grew up with Man Magazine. That was the week that was, in Saturday Night Live. Same difference. And G.K. Chesterton said, angels take themselves lightly, that's why they can fly. And your piece, Dennis, was brilliant, because also etymology, they asked McLuhan, are you an optimist or a pessimist? He says, I'm an apocalypse, we're fucked. And we don't understand, most people don't understand that the word apocalypse means to reveal. So we're all Totos in the Wizard of Oz, pulling the curtain back and say, here, you decide. So I guess I don't have a question except thank you for your brilliant piece.
Can I thank you for your brilliant piece too? It was very good. Well, one thing I was thinking when you wrote it, when you were speaking of it, this sacramental view, I was thinking about a lull, who is definitely not Catholic, still very Christian, very set in his Christian. But I think that if you talk about your sacramental view, I don't know, do you think that would also describe Lowell's work? And what does that do with your thesis?
I wanted to tell you, I thought that I was going to be expanding my list to go beyond McLuhan, Ong, and Carey by including a fourth Catholic. And in my book, on a chapter on him, I said he was Catholic because other people had said that he was, and so I said, yeah, he also meets these criteria. And I thought it makes sense because he's informed by his Catholic view. And then I contacted the guy, he's still alive. He says, yes, indeed, I still do. Albert Workman is his name. He says, yes, indeed, I do hold a Catholic or sacramental view, but I'm actually, I attend Mass at some Anglican church. But he used to be Catholic. He was Roman Catholic until the 80s, I think, and he had problems with the liturgy, so he shifted. So I thought, okay, maybe this model it's still not disproven just because the guy is no longer Catholic. But I actually think a person doesn't even have to be Catholic and maybe not even Christian. I'm not sure about that yet. I think it is possible that a person could have this sensibility without necessarily embracing the convictions, the articles of faith. But at the very least, we would expect people who do embrace the faith to the extent that these guys do to have that kind of view. If they don't, you have to question why, what's going on. So with the lull, I think, in fact, the way I would look at this is that all of these guys are probably more one of these five characteristics than another. McLuhan may be, for example, more anagogical, and or maybe Ong would be more anagogical because he doesn't really allude too much to the transcendent, whereas McLuhan maybe is more fully that because you can only understand those things if you view it in some other lens. So it could be that the lull fits this framework, but is maybe more disruptive than the others, but would probably possess those other traits too. I don't know. I'd be interested to see how this model applies or not.
I think you had a wonderful paper. I think it's obvious to me, at least, that McLuhan and Ong shared this view. I don't know about Carey. But with Ong, I think the problem with why people object to this idea that the faith is important in their work is that it becomes tendentious, and therefore it can be dismissed very quickly that that's just a Catholic doctrine that's being promulgated. And for Ong, it wasn't that way at all. He had an apostolate, he said, of academic work, but his religious views were evolving out of the scientific worldview rather than vice versa. There wasn't a view to that. And these people, I don't think, had the same feeling. Ong objected to the law as being too pessimistic, and Ong was not anti-writing or anti-script. He thought they were necessary. He wasn't reactionary. He wasn't trying to go back to a previous event in time, what's going on. And I think that's, and he objected to McLuhan's favorite author for a while, Catholic writer. It's Father Brown.
Chesterton.
Yeah, he warned McLuhan against Chesterton a number of times, for instance. And so if they're sharing a sacramental view, it's a different type of view.
you going to comment again there? Cut you off.
I don't know, did you call for comment? Did you want to?
I just wanted to make sure that Palm was not put into a camp of being a tendentious Catholic writer who was promulgating a Catholic worldview and using media ecology as a vehicle to do that.
Right, that's why the importance of the anagogy category. It doesn't demand, some concealed religious disclosure that, what I'm really doing is peddling the faith, because it finds it intrinsic in all reality, but it does so informed by, a sensibility toward that.
That's a very good paper.
Yes.
A question for you. This idea that technology has democratized the process of making or making up the news, it's problematic in that while it has given everyone a voice, the news is not opinion. So how do you suggest we go about correcting that problem? It seems like the horse is out of the barn. It's like, but is it educating the masses in the difference between news and opinion? It seems like a tsunami there. Like how do we do that? Or holding the legacy media, holding their feet to the fire in some way. What, I don't know. How? What do you suggest? Do you see a solution?
Yeah, but it's problematic. I agree with you. The problem is that all the people can put information, not make news, but put information, opinion, or whatever, and we cannot more control media, because we have a lot of media. We have media from other countries sending any kind of information. So most important thing that we can do is to empower the people, so to educate, to teach how to read this kind of information, how to do with this information, because in other way it's impossible. We cannot control all the flow of information that is carrying.
Yeah, and it seems as though the marketplace of ideas, that the conventional thinking of the marketplace of ideas, let them all go, let them all come out. The positive ones, the strong ones, the workable ones will rise to the top. It seems that conventional idea has really suffered a fatal blow. And so I'm thinking that what we're dealing with fake news is more than a disruptive technology, and much as I think about it, I can't think of a solution.
But
I don't think anybody else can.
Because, for example, the other thing, what Germany is trying to do, I think it's impossible to have all the countries trying to observe what is flowing on the internet. So I think it's not going to be the solution. I think we need to empower all the people.
Tetra has a proposal for a solution. Like if news was all about facticity, new information, now it's mostly about fakeness, or largely about fakeness. So it's flipped. I wonder, does McLuhan offer the Tetra as a prescription or a proposal about what to do when the flipping happens, or does he just observe that it happens?
Seems like it just observes it.
Yeah. Or a little, criticizing propaganda. Is there a proposal in there too?
Yeah, keeps coming back to the individual, thinking it through and understanding how to look at it, right?
Our postman, informing ourselves to death. Although he would say, just information itself, irrespective of the content, exerts a negative effect. But I wonder if he has, what's his proposal? Scottish newspaper gathering all of these as a response.
But fake news sharpens your critical thinking skills. So it enables the user to go, I've got to think. A Spanish icon, Louis Buñuel, said, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. So, Tom, I thought your paper was brilliant, and McLuhan also talked about center without margin, or a museum without walls. So Walter Pater said that all music aspires to the condition of music. How does media ecology aspire to the condition of music? I'm not saying auditory information, I'm saying specifically music.
There is a book by a Frenchman in 1988 that takes up the topic of music in this regard. And as I'm getting older, these names, as you notice, don't pop into my mind right away.
Tony Schwartz, Tuning the World?
What was it? Andrew?
Tony Schwartz?
Tony Schwartz? Is
It was a French, it came out in French.
Pierre Dada? Pierre Dada?
Jean Baudrillard.
I'm sorry.
This is right.
But that's the best I can really do.
That's right.
I think Neil Postman had a really great speech. I believe it might have been at the Disney Forum. Do you remember this whole pickled herring thing of the chocolate eclair metaphor we discussed?
Yes.
It was a famous speech where he talked about the whole idea about how often he'll do an experiment. Somebody hasn't read the Times that day. And he said, by any chance to see that article in the Times, it says that you can lose 5 pounds a month if you eat chocolate eclairs every day. And then he makes it sound just likely enough that it could possibly be believed. Then he also said the idea, did you know that there's material within your chair, some offhand chemical, which is made from a pickled herring? And when you think about all the random chemicals that are used in products, I mean, they used to use like fish bladders and Guinness, I wouldn't be surprised. But the fact is, I think the solution with fake news would have to be to look at humility with all news, as well as all things. Because if I remember, at least as teachers say, anything that you see from a screen, it's not real. You have to treat it almost like it's not real in a sense. It's good to like try to have an idea of what could be real, but also one should have the idea of taking everything universally with a grain of salt, but believing what you yourself personally consider. That's the best solution I can propose.
Yeah, but that Neil worked on this kind of problems, and he used the TV, the television, to see what kind of effects has television on people. Well, they set up a lot, you know, in technology we can find these ideas about the impact of technology and also in amazing ourselves to death, but we don't have something specific for going against this kind of problems, fake news.
There's a problem with only believing what you see, and that is, you know, like a week ago, I had never seen San Francisco before. And honestly, in my travels, it wasn't so bad. I was starting to wonder if it was real. But if I didn't believe it was real, it would have been really hard to get on a plane to come here. And so you can't just look at everything and say, well, because I haven't experienced it, it's not real.
I'm not saying supposing like to think that it's entirely fictitious, but when it happens to when you're hearing like a source and it's say government managed media, like that's a lot of like media sources specifically talking about whether you talk about Russia Today or whether you talk about Al Jazeera, things like that. Just know what the source is, and so you could take something and think, okay, I can assume that at least part of this is true. But before you take drastic action based upon something that is read, I think always like some humility is required with information.
The worst part is that the media legacy sources now, for months or almost years, are saying anonymous sources, government sources. So
Right.
it's like it's not just the general public; it's the people who should know better. Yeah.
Okay, now there will be a plenary session in the Moraga room at 3. So
Where is the Moraga?
the Moraga room is in the Soda Center, where you guys all registered. It's a room to the left.
So where you place in walking distance, I think well, it's cut into the room, it's just beyond. No AC in that room, nothing. Is that in walking distance?
Less than 5-minute drive, but it might be like 4 minutes. Yeah, unless be like a 15. Yeah, it does get cooler in the
Drink myself in Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
No. I honestly have a feeling of like, but I thought, somebody, it appears to be here from here.